let's build a full stack bug reporter in .NET. So the end goal for this bug reporter is I want it to be a module or even entire microservice that we can drop in and integrate into any application, and it'll allow the users of that application to easily report bugs. But for the sake of development, we are going to build this as a standalone full stack application, and we'll worry about modularizing it and making it reusable down the road. So getting into the design of this bug reporter, I have thought about this a little bit. So the high level design is that a user is going to report a bug. That bug is going to get sent to our backend server. And then on the backend, we're going to transform that bug report into a GitHub issue and then use a GitHub bot in order to create a GitHub issue in the repository where our code lives. And then a developer is going to be able to see that issue and be able to address it, maybe turn it into like a JIRA story. But that's really the main goal of the application. We're going to allow users to report bugs so that we can get feedback about our application and fix issues. Some other things I've thought about in terms of technology is I think this backend is going to be somewhat small. So I'm just going to run it on Azure Functions, which will be exciting because I really haven't done anything with Azure Functions on my channel yet. But aside from all that, haven't really thought about much else, which brings us to what we're going to be doing now. So we're going to plan out this application a little bit. And I have done planning videos in the past. People have appreciated them. So I wanted to do that for this application as well. So we're going to start off by just creating some diagrams. These are going to be pretty high level diagrams that go into use cases and some other high level architecture. So we are in Draw.io. I'll leave a link to Draw.io in the description. So let's create our diagram. I'm going to name this the name of our application, which I haven't said yet, but we're going to call this bug reporter Bugporter. So kind of a combination of bug reporter, just Bugporter. So let's name that as our diagram, Bugporter. And let's create this. We're just going to start from a blank diagram. So I want to start off with use case diagrams because I feel like it's a good way to describe, of course, what our application is going to do, which is pretty important. So this page 1, we're going to rename this to use cases. There we go. Rename that. And over here on the sidebar, let's go to the UML section. And we have some use case diagram pieces over here. So we have our actor and we have our use cases. Anyways, let's bring our actor over here. Let's start with them. So let's rename this actor. We'll just call this user. Keep it generic for now. And let's bring over a rectangle. So this is going to enclose all of our use cases that our system supports. And then let's throw some text up here. And we'll call this the name of our application. So this is Bugporter. And let's move in our first use case. Let's bring this over. And we want our user to be able to report bugs. So that's the first use case, probably the most important. And then our user is also going to be able to view the bugs that they have reported. So we'll call that view reported bugs. And then lastly, we should allow users to close out a bug if it's been resolved. So we'll support another use case and allow users to close a bug. So these are probably the 3 primary use cases I can think of. So let's close this off, clean this up a little bit, and connect our user to these use cases. So let's take a line and go to each of these use cases. That looks good. So although these are the primary use cases, I do want to extend some of these a little bit. And specifically, I want to extend this view reported bugs use case. So another thing we'll allow the user to do is view only their active bugs or view only their closed bugs. So we're going to offer extensions to this use case for viewing reported bugs. So they'll be able to view open reported bugs and view closed reported bugs. And let's represent these as extensions so we can have a dotted line. Whoops, need to connect this to view reported bugs. And let's add an arrow to this line. And we should also say extends. And then same thing for this view closed reported bugs. Same thing, going to extend this view reported bugs use case. So what we're saying here is that viewing open reported bugs and viewing closed reported bugs extends just viewing all reported bugs. I should rename this to report bug, not report bugs. Let's keep it singular, I think. So let's talk about the developer's perspective, because they are also going to want to see all the bugs that all users have reported. Now, this isn't going to be something that our system is going to be concerned about, because the user could just go into GitHub and view all the bugs that we've converted into GitHub issues. So I kind of want to represent that in our system. So let's add another rectangle over here. In fact, I can just copy this one. Let's copy this rectangle, move it over here, and this is going to represent GitHub. Let's make this smaller, but let's add another actor. So this is going to be for our developer. So this is who wants to see the bugs. So I guess we really don't have to document this since this is outside of our system, but I still want to represent it because I feel like it's a key part of our system. So let's add this use case to the developer wants to view all reported bugs. So let's connect the developer to that use case. And actually the developer can also close a bug. So whenever that bug is fixed, they can close it. So of course, there's many other use cases that GitHub offers to developers, but these are the main two that we're concerned with for our application. So I should actually center these, but this should wrap up everything that I think we should represent in this use case diagram. So pretty satisfied with this use case diagram. So the focus of this series is going to be implementing Bugporter and supporting these use cases. And maybe I should add some color here. Let's make Bugporter red. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and make GitHub blue. So there we go. So now that we have our use case diagrams and we have a general idea of how our users are going to use our application, let's get into the high-level design of the application from a technical perspective. So let's add another page to our draw IO diagrams, and we'll name this systems. So this diagram is going to represent all of the relevant systems and how they're going to interact and how they're going to depend on each other. So we can probably just use rectangles for this. So let's bring over a rectangle. Let me zoom in a little bit. So this first rectangle is going to represent our client application. So the front end UI that the user is going to interact with. And we'll call this Bugporter client. And the Bugporter client is going to send requests to the Bugporter API. So the client is going to talk to the API for use cases such as reporting bugs, closing bugs, and viewing bugs. And then finally, the Bugporter API is going to interact with the GitHub API in order to create GitHub issues for bugs that users report, in order to fetch bugs that users have previously reported, and in order to close out any bugs that the user wants to close. And let me actually just line all these up. I don't know why I didn't do that. There we go. And then let's also connect these. So let's grab a line, and the client, of course, is going to talk to the API. Our Bugporter API is going to talk to the GitHub API. Let's bring over the colors that we used in the use case diagram. So Bugporter is going to be red and GitHub is going to be blue. So this line of systems, nothing crazy. Just looking at the use case diagram, you could probably assume that this is what it would probably look like, but there are some other systems that we need to consider. So for one, we are going to have to handle authentication since we're building this as a full stack standalone application. So for now, that's going to be on our end. So for authentication, I want to use Firebase Authentication. So I've used Firebase Authentication for so many of my own applications. I've also used it in many series on my channel. It's a free, easy to use authentication backend. And most importantly, we won't have to roll our own authentication. So we're going to use Firebase Authentication here. So we're going to be integrating with the Firebase Authentication API. Let's change the color of this. Let's make it, how about green? So our Bugporter API is going to integrate with the Firebase Authentication API in order to authenticate Firebase users making requests to our API. So that means our client, of course, is going to have to integrate with the Firebase Authentication API as well in order to register, log in, and ultimately get a Firebase access token in order to authenticate with our backend API. So that's one new integration that we're going to need, but we're also going to need a database actually. So even though we're using GitHub to store and interact with reported bugs, we are going to need a database for potentially a few things. But the most critical thing I'm thinking of right now is we'll need this database in order to map Firebase users to all of the issues that they've reported. So this database, we'll make this red since this is Bugporter related. And this, we'll just call it the Bugporter DB. And the API is going to be the only thing that interacts with the database, of course. So again, this database, primary purpose I can think of for now is it's going to map Firebase user IDs to all of the GitHub issue IDs that the Firebase user has created. So these are going to be all the key systems involved with our application. Some other things that we can represent with this diagram is that the API and the database are going to live in the cloud. This cloud is kind of ugly. Let's send this backward all the way back. There we go. And let's make this a little bit better. I don't like this cloud. Something about it, it's just not, it just has too many curves. Let's make it wider. Is that good? Okay, that's good. So anyways, our Bugporter API and our database are going to be in the cloud, potentially Azure. Well, yeah, our API is going to run on Azure Functions, so that's definitely going to be in Azure. And I guess probably the database will too. I was thinking about using Firebase real-time database, but I might just go with an Azure SQL database instead. So now that we know what our application is going to do and what the high-level design of our application looks like, let's get into planning out the work to build our application. So we're going to create a JIRA project for this, and we're going to track and plan all of our work within JIRA, which sounds overkill for what we consider as a personal project, but I've really enjoyed doing this for other personal projects. So let's create a project. I'll leave a link to JIRA in the description so that you can create an account and create a project if you'd also like to take this approach. So for now, let's create a project. And I'm going to go with Scrum. I've enjoyed this for some other projects I've done. So let's use the Scrum template. We can go with a team managed project. That should be enough for what we're doing. Let's do that. The name of this project is Bugporter. I do not want the key for our issues to be bug because all of our issues are going to have bug as the issue key. So I don't think I want this as the key. Let's make it BGP. So the reason I didn't want it as bug is because this is a prefix for all of our issue keys. So if it was bug, then I might get confused that all of our issues are bugs when some of them are actually features that we want to implement, which most of them will be, hopefully. Anyways, let's create our project. So Bugporter, create that. This usually takes a while. All right, our project was created. So we are in Bugporter, our new project. So let's move over to our backlog and we're going to create some issues for some of the initial work that we want to get done to kick off this project. So I should preface all of this JIRA stuff by saying that I'm not going to be following like the hardcore Scrum manifesto, obviously, because I'm just a one-man team right now, but really just using this to track issues, track things that we need to get done, and plan out future work. So for these first issues that we're going to create, going back to the systems that we've diagrammed, we are really going to be focusing on the API to start off this series. And in fact, we probably won't do any client development at all, and we'll just hit the API through Postman. So these first issues that we create are going to be solely focused on the API and maybe some of these other integration points that we have. So first issue, we have nothing right now, so we want to create our functions project. So again, our Bugporter API is going to run on Azure Functions. So we want to create our Azure Functions project. And let me just add a little prefix here to represent that this is API work. So that'll be our very first issue. We're also going to just be starting off with this first use case of just allowing the user to report a bug. So let's start from the entry point to our API. So we're going to add another issue and we want to add endpoint to report bug. I suppose this is a function endpoint since it's going to be an HTTP Azure function. Might as well say that, HTTP function endpoint. And actually this issue isn't going to be associated with actually implementing the bug reporting against GitHub. So maybe we should call this stub, the HTTP function endpoint to report a bug. Because really all I want this issue to take on is creating a function that takes in a request to report the bug and isn't really concerned with any of the downstream GitHub interactions. So we'll tackle those in later issues. But to do that, we're going to have to create a GitHub bot. So our API is going to use the bot account to transform bugs into GitHub issues against our repository. So this issue will be to create GitHub bot with permission to create issues in repository. I guess speaking of a GitHub bot, we're also going to have to set up our GitHub repository. So let's add an issue for that. So set up GitHub repository for project, and the tag for this, we'll just call it project. So just basic project stuff. So once we have the bot and the function endpoint, we can connect the report bug endpoint to GitHub issues via our GitHub bot. And then that should satisfy most of this report bug use case, which is what we'll focus on for now. So we won't create many more issues, but there are some other things that I can imagine that we'll have to set up for our Azure Functions project. And one thing I can think of is dependency injection. I don't think Azure Functions scaffolds that out by default, so we might have to set that up ourselves. So we want to set up dependency injection. So create an issue for that. I think Azure Functions sets up logging for us, so we won't have to set that up. So that's good, because that's going to be a key part of our project, of course. And I realize these issues won't fully satisfy the report bug use case because we're going to have to set up authentication as well. But we'll deal with authentication a little bit later. I really just want to focus on the core domain logic of our application first. So let's move some of these issues into our first sprint. So we want to set up our GitHub repository, of course. We want to set up or create our project. That'll be important. We'll want to stub out our HTTP function to report bugs, and probably want to set up dependency injection pretty early as well. So this is all we're going to do for our first sprint. Going to be a small sprint. I'm going to keep these sprints small. I want them to be chunks that we can knock out in a single video maybe. So by the end of our first video, we'll have our project set up, and we'll have an endpoint stubbed out, and we'll also set up dependency injection as well. So we'll have our project pretty much laid out and ready to implement features. So let's start this sprint. We'll just call it BGP Sprint 1. I really don't even care about the start date and end date, so we'll just leave those as the default. But the sprint goal, we want to set up a basic Azure Functions project. So let's start this sprint, and boom, we move over to our board. So let's take on our first issue. So let's set up a GitHub repository for our project. And this will be the last thing we set up in this planning video. So over in GitHub, let's create a new repository. We'll call this Bugporter. Make our repository public and create this. And not much else we can do because we don't even have a solution yet. Maybe we'll go ahead and create a solution as well. Just like a blank solution with no projects yet. So then next time we can just jump right into our solution and create our project. Let's move over to Visual Studio. Let's add a new... Oh, I can't just add a new solution. Let's just add a new project and then delete the project and just have a blank solution when we're done. So we'll just create a console app. We'll name it console app 1. And this is where I want my project to live. Our solution name will be Bugporter. Let's move ahead and create this. We're going to be running this on .NET 6. This whole series will probably work on .NET 5 and probably .NET Core as well. And hopefully long into the future as well. So let's create that. There we go. And let's just delete this console app 1. Let's remove that. And that was just removing the project from our solution. We'll also have to delete the folder in File Explorer. So let's delete console app 1. So let's select that, delete it. And there we go. Now we pretty much just have a blank solution. So let's initialize our Git repository. So let's take our solution, right click it, and open it in the terminal down here. So let's do a git init at the root of our project where our solution lives. Let me do some configuration on this Git repository. So I'm going to do a git config and local. I want to set my username to singleton Sean and my user email to my singleton Sean email. So there we go. Should be configured. Let's look at our repository. So we want to ignore some files. So specifically this .vs file that we'd potentially track. So let's create a git ignore file. So in our solution explorer, we can switch to folder view here and then add a new file. So it's going to be our .git ignore, and we want to ignore the VS directory, as well as bin and obj, which are going to get created when we create a project. And I think that's everything that I can imagine for now for things we want to ignore. While we're here, let's create a README as well. So a readme.md file, markdown file, and we'll just add a heading to this, Bugporter. So I'll fill out this README later on. So let's look at our Git status. We should be ready to commit. There we go. So now we're just tracking our solution, our git ignore, and our README. So let's add just all these files, and let's commit this. Our message, so I want to reference the issue that we're working on. So this is BGP-4. So let's use that issue name in our commit message. So BGP-4, and our message will just be add solution. There we go. So I want to push this code to GitHub. So let's grab this Git endpoint for our repository. So copy that, and we want to add this as a remote. So we want to add, we'll call this origin as always, and paste in our Git URL. So add that, and we should be able to do a Git push. We want to push to our origin remote, and I believe our branch name is master. So there we go. Should have been pushed. Let's refresh. And there we go. We got our repository. So with that, this first issue can be closed out. Hooray. And there we go. We've gone through the full lifetime of an issue. So next time we'll tackle these 3 remaining issues and start setting up our Azure Functions project. So I did go step by step with all of this JIRA stuff where I had created the issues and set up the sprint. But a lot of this stuff I'll probably just do off camera in the future. But I'll still be sure to show off the board and show off what we'll be working on. So basically, I'll just be creating issues and creating sprints off camera in the background, since it does take up some time. And I think we'd rather focus on the code and the actual development side of things. At least I think. Leave feedback otherwise, please do. So with that, I feel pretty comfortable with the foundations we've laid out for this project. So just to summarize, we created a use case diagram to describe how our users are going to use our Bugporter application. And then we also created a very high level, and a very simple, now that I look at it again, a very simple diagram of all of the systems that'll make up our application, and a high level overview of how they'll interact with each other. And then we moved over to JIRA to figure out how we'll build out our application. So laid out some issues, mostly associated with setting up our project and creating our first endpoint to report bugs. And then finally, we set up our GitHub repository and laid out our solution in Visual Studio and committed all of that and pushed it to our repository. So with that, we have the foundations for our project. Feel pretty comfortable. Feel like we planned out enough to move forward, which we will do next time. So hopefully you all enjoyed the planning video, and hopefully you got some ideas of how you might go about planning your own project. Even though I didn't really do anything crazy, but I still feel like this was enough to communicate what we want our application to do. Aside from that, if you have any questions, criticisms, or concerns, be sure to leave those below in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video or are enjoying the channel, consider becoming a member. Other than that, leave a like or subscribe for more. Thank you.